Hi, everybody. So this week, the topic that I wanted to talk about was basically just fitness mistakes that I have made over the years. Because, of course, nobody is perfect. Everyone makes mistakes along the way. We don't all, just come out of the womb completely jacked. And so, there's a learning process to it. And I think that this is helpful because oftentimes, beginners, they're very anxious about the fact that they don't know everything. They're very anxious about the fact that they feel, a bit out of place, when they first go to the gym for the first time and maybe they don't know what to do. So I want to normalize the idea that, making mistakes, looking silly, doing whatever, that's part of the process. That's part of the learning process for everybody. Everybody makes mistakes. Everyone gets better over time. That's just how it is. So what I'm going to go ahead today and talk about is just basically, I've talked a little bit about sort of, my history in terms of my training, what I've done, in the past, but I want to kind of focus today on all the stuff that I did wrong and in fact, really wrong. And of course, just some of the lessons that I learned from that, so that maybe you can avoid these mistakes yourself in the future. So kind of the first thing was just, starting off as a beginner, I did way too much stuff. Way too soon. I didn't really have any clue, how to design a program to train for specific goals. I didn't know what goals I wanted. It's just, a lot of people, they come into the gym and they're just sort of like, I just want to get in shape, and they don't really know what that means. They don't really understand, the difference between, say, training for strength or training for size or training for endurance, or, just sort of what levels of activity are useful for, those specific goals. So I would basically go to the gym and do everything, like just literally everything. I would go to the gym and I would do like, maybe it was like a leg day. And so I'd be like, okay, I would do like an hour of like, training on the weight machines. Then I would do a half an hour treadmill and a half an hour cycle, half hour of elliptical, and then I would go home. Or I do like, super intense grueling workouts. And then I'd like do like boot camp classes right afterwards when I was already exhausted. Endless arm workouts, endless, just sort of focusing on the wrong sort of thing, just sort of going into the gym and just hitting whatever random weights or reps or sets I felt like hitting that day, not really tracking my training at all, not really making any sort of, consistent effort to move forward and to, progress in some way, shape, or form. And it over time that sort of, developed a little bit. At first it was just sort of I'd go to the gym and do just whatever I felt like. And then it turned into stuff like, okay, I would do sort of like bodybuilding style splits where it'd be like, this is a chest day, this is a back day, this is a leg day or whatever. But it never did anything. This is when I was just starting out and I was just sort of very excited to see any kind of results, right? And so, yeah, I saw, some results, certainly not, kind of anywhere near the sort of results that I was hoping for or looking for, simply because, again, my training was too unfocused and too random. I didn't really see any progress in terms of, strength. I do remember there was one time where basically I set this weird commitment. I don't know why I did this in retrospect, but I set myself this commitment that I would train every single day for a month. And I was like, okay, and I did that. And, again, every single one of those training days was basically entirely random. And then after that month, I, basically went ahead and tried this, my strength on this machine that I was used to doing. It was a chest press machine. And I was weaker than I had been when I started that month. And, realistically, of course, that was probably just because I was, training more because I was losing weight. I was losing muscle mass. I wasn't specifically training for strength in any way, shape, or form. But I was really like, sort of like, oh, what do you mean I got weaker? I don't get it. I trained so hard. What was this doing for me? So, very, very early on, this is a problem I think that a lot of people who are very enthusiastic about training, they want to get good results. They really enjoy it. But they're just doing way too much stuff and they're not really doing stuff in any kind of focused way. And it's, sort of holding them back. I was sort of lean. I was very light. But I didn't really build a ton of muscle or strength in the process because, of course, again, I was just sort of messing around. Luckily, sort of the thing I learned from that was, I got this was before I got my training certification. So, I got my training certification and that was kind of the start of really, thinking more critically about the training process and, how to, design a program to meet specific goals instead of just hitting whatever program I felt like for the day or doing whatever I felt like for the day or, oh, I saw this thing on bodybuilding.com, I'm going to try it out or whatever. So that really taught me to think systematically about training. I got into powerlifting around that time. And of course, powerlifting was really good for me because it gave me a lot of structure. It taught me, oh, this is how you train for strength. And then of course, following that, it was like, okay, this is how I train for size. This is how I train for endurance. I started to really divide those things up in my head as opposed to just sort of mixing a lot of stuff together, all at once in a way that of course was not very productive. So that was kind of the first big mistake that I made. And of course, the takeaway from that was simply, learn to write a program, learn to, work with a program, get someone who can write you a program, etc. Learn some sort of basics in terms of how programs work, before just simply sort of doing whatever you feel like or just sort of whatever you've seen on the internet. The next one was basically just doing a crap ton of core exercises. So this one basically started out because I was really into Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee is sort of one of my role models in terms of physique, in terms of strength. I was just really into Bruce Lee at the time. And so I was sort of copying his training methods, however I could, and this wasn't even anything smart. It was just like, I had seen, Wikipedia, I think, maybe that just said like, Bruce Lee, does like this much stuff for core every day. And I was like, okay, well, I've got to do that too. It didn't really make any sense, of course, because I was not training to be like Bruce Lee. I was not training to be a, martial arts athlete. I was not training for combat sports where core is actually quite important. I was just training for general fitness and I was just training to, get bigger and stronger. And so of course, doing endless core training is kind of a waste of time when you're doing that. Of course, I didn't really realize that at the time. So I was doing a ton of core training. I was doing basically, 30 minutes of core training a day at one point. What I would do is basically I had a little sit-up bench that I had bought. I basically set it up in front of my computer, in front of my TV, and I would just watch like a half an hour TV show and I would just do sit-ups the entire time or do crunches the entire time or, whatever, rest periodically and keep going. This gets pointless after a certain point because you're just doing so many. It doesn't matter. It doesn't do anything. It's not like it's gonna, build abs. It's not like it's gonna get you super shredded and lean because of course you get abs by being lean, which of course comes from diet, more so than just doing a ton of endless core exercises. So I was just wasting time, and it got to a really weird point where basically, I could do so many reps of like basically they were like crappy, like mostly but not quite full range of motion crunches. I would do so many crunches in a row that it would take me literally like an hour to do, like it would take so long just to do enough crunches to really like start to feel it, because I was just used to it so much. And it would be like something like, I do like a few hundred in a set, and that would take me like 15 minutes. And then I'd like take a rest, and then I'd like do another 15 minutes. It was dumb. It didn't make any sense. I didn't get anything out of it. I don't know why I did it. So of course, there are two takeaways from this one. One, you don't need to train core that much if you're not, training for something that specifically requires a lot of core. Some sports do require a lot of core strength. Unfortunately, just generally looking good, lifting heavy weights, building some muscle mass, not necessarily a part of that. The other thing is that you should not be focusing on just doing endless repetitions of the easy stuff. You shouldn't just be doing thousands of sit-ups or thousands of crunches. You should be finding harder, more advanced core exercises to get into. Things like the dragon flag or things like, some of the more advanced calisthenics movements. Those are going to be much harder, and that means that you don't have to spend endless time in the gym training core. You can just focus on doing the harder variations for a bit shorter of a time, and you can still get a good effect, and you can still continue to train and advance your core there. So that's another important lesson is you don't have to waste all your time training core anyway. So the next big mistake that I made was basically that I made a really dumb move when I was first starting out and I was, training overhead press. I was training at the time, very linear progression sort of thing. So what I would do was I would just try and add weight every single week. I'm not, I wasn't, being smart about it. I wasn't taking it slowly. So I was trying to add weight every single week. And of course, the overhead press is a weaker lift than most other lifts naturally. So what that means is that it's going to be weaker to start off with, and it's going to develop more slowly. And that means that you need to take a slower approach in terms of progressing it. So where it's something like a squat or a deadlift where, yes, you can continue to add weight to the bar every single time that you train, and that's actually probably going to last you quite a while, simply because those are pretty strong movements. You can gather strength relatively quickly, and so that might last you for a while. You know, when you apply the same thing to, say, like a bench press, okay, not as fast, but, maybe, not going to be tragically horrendous, right? But when you apply it to something like the overhead press develops relatively slowly. That's a recipe for disaster, because you need to take that carefully, especially because the overhead press, in my opinion, is one of those lifts that can really mess with beginners if they don't know the form very well. And so I was trying to add weight every single week, and I got very frustrated very quickly because I was, again, just adding weight too quickly, and I wasn't, I wasn't really expecting that it would be so slow. And so I was really trying to muscle through it. I was trying to push through it. I was trying to keep adding weight, even though I couldn't, even though I was exhausted, I didn't really have the strength, I couldn't really do it. And so, I was basically, putting myself through the grinder. Like, it was really messing me up. And there was one day where basically, I tried and failed to hit, I think it was maybe 175 or 180 for, I had been, adding 5 pounds every week, and I started at, maybe 150, and I had gotten to like 170, and it had just, been totally, crushing me. And, I wasn't really able to do the reps I had prescribed for myself, but I was thinking, okay, it's fine. I can still keep adding weight. I got to like 180, and I'm like struggling to do singles or something like that. And, basically I really tried to muscle through and do more work than I should have tried to do. And as a result, I was, basically I had the weight overhead, and I got to a point where I was basically being bent over backwards, and I really sort of like, I don't even know what I did, but I really pushed to muscle the weight up. And in the process, I just felt something, in my back. Like, it was just, one of my spinal just did this little pop thing. And, immediately there was pain, and I knew that I had messed up. And so I basically had like sort of a lower back injury that took quite a long time. I would say that it took several months, honestly, to recover from. And so during that time, I had to be very careful about the kind of work that I could do. I could not squat or deadlift. I had to do all of my lower body exercises on, machines like leg press, leg extension, that sort of thing. I had to do, I could do bench presses, I could do rows. I could not do overhead presses unless I was, doing them supported. Basically I just couldn't put, a ton of weight on my back. And so I had to do everything with supported variations or on machines. And so, that was what I would say a classical example of just injuring yourself because you don't really know the lift very well. You're trying too hard to push it in terms of progression before you know the lift very well. And so, you just hurt yourself. You don't have the form, you don't have the stability, you don't have the strength there yet. And so, you just push a little bit too fast and you hurt yourself, and that happens, right? So, the thing that I learned from this one is, again, basically just that beginners need to be a lot more careful about this lift. You probably won't have the good form. You probably won't have the stability. You probably need to start off with a seated variation so that you can get the movement down, so you can learn a little bit about that stabilization and about how that's going to feel, having that weight overhead, and of course, just having slower progressions. Don't do linear progressions where you're just trying to add weight every single week. That's a disaster. Instead, you need to take slower progressions that do not add weight every single week, and instead focus on other things like reps, sets, volume, etc. So the next major mistake that I made was program hopping. So, like I said, at first I didn't really have a program. I wasn't really, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just sort of doing random stuff. And then, I learned a bit more. I got my training certification. I learned about powerlifting. I got into powerlifting. I started following programs. And at that point, the problem that I had was that I was program hopping constantly. So I had a program that I had started out with that worked really well for me. And within about, I would say, 6 months to a year of training on this program, and I don't even remember what this program was. It was literally just something that I had found on the internet that was, supposedly something that basically like some old legendary powerlifter had used. It was not, this was before the current like set of like all the cool programs like Starting Strength and 531 and all that stuff started to come out. And, we had that sort of resurgence of popular interest in powerlifting. This was just before all that. And I was just, Googling random stuff on the internet, and I just happened to find this program. And I don't even remember the exact progression, but it was basically a very slow linear progression where you would have a weight and you would do one extra rep at that weight every single time that you completed that, that workout. And then you would just do this until you hit a certain number of reps. And then once you'd hit that number of reps, you would add 5 or 10 pounds. You would bump the number of reps back down, and then you would just again add 1 rep each time you do that workout until you get back to, that number, and then you add weight again. So it was a very slow linear program. It worked out really well for me, in fact, and I was doing great. I hit really, really big maxes. I would say that I hit probably about 80% of my current strength levels within, again, just like 6 months or a year of following this program. And then, things started to slow down, because that's normal. You just start to slow down over time as you get stronger and as your body gets more adapted to these things. And I got frustrated, which is a big mistake that a lot of beginner intermediates make, is they start to see those gains slow down. And instead of realizing that means they need to dig their heels in and just push more and continue to advance their programs, they start to, get like, oh, okay, maybe it's not working anymore. Maybe I need to do other stuff. They just don't really know what to do next when things start to slow down, right? And so I started program hopping. I was always on this mindset that, okay, maybe there's this other perfect program out there that's going to work for me, that's going to solve this, that's going to keep me going. I've got to try out all these different things. And I tried out a lot of different things, right? I did try out all those programs. I did try out, 5-3-1, starting strength, all those kinds of programs. And of course, none of them really worked for me, because the problem was not that I didn't have a good program. The problem was that I had a good program, but I was not sticking with it. I was not continuing to progress it the way that I needed to. And so I was hopping, through all these different programs. When I wouldn't see progress within a single month, I would be like, okay, this is it. I got to drop this and try something else. And, and I did that for a little while. I did that for maybe a year or two. And of course, I didn't see much of any progress at all during that year or two. Again, because I was simply hopping programs. So I wasted a lot of time on programs that didn't work for me, or, that would have worked well if I had stuck out with them for longer. The lesson in retrospect is that you need to find something that works, and you just need to stick with it. You just need to find ways to keep progressing it. You don't want to get frustrated just because, you have a month where your progress is slow or where you're not really seeing progress, because that becomes very normal. I'm at a stage now where, again, I've been training for over a decade. So now I have to train a whole year just to see maybe 10 or 15 pounds added to a lift. So it takes me a long, long time of serious, consistent training to add any further progress. And that's normal at this stage, right? Like that's something you have to get used to at a certain point. So, you don't want to program hop within that phase, because that's going to mean that you're losing. If you're program hopping, you're just definitely not going to progress. You need to be able to stick with a program. You need to be able to continue to progress it and move forward from there. The next big mistake that I made with fitness, it didn't start out as a mistake. It just started out as an injury, and this injury was not actually due to anything I did in the gym. At the time, I was working a job in delivery. So what I would do was I was delivering heavy fitness equipment to people's homes. And so, it was something like, okay, we've got to carry this, few 100-pound treadmill up, this flight of stairs or whatever. And, it's you and one other guy. And, sometimes the stairs are very, windy or whatever, or you don't have a good entry point to get into something. So you have to sort of wedge things in very carefully. It was a very difficult job. It was very heavy. Basically every single day of the week, I was going out there and I was having to carry around very heavy objects, totally ruined my fingers and my grip strength, also totally ruined my low back quite a lot. But the problem ultimately was that I injured myself on the job. So one day I'm, walking up the stairs with this heavy treadmill, and I sort of step on a stair the wrong way. And, I just felt a bit of a twinge in my knee, and I was like, oh, it's fine. It's nothing. It's just a small thing. But because it was a small thing, I did not treat it seriously. I did not take it seriously. And that was my big mistake. Because I just continued to push things. In addition to all that stuff I was doing at work, I was also going to the gym every night and continuing to train. I was at the time doing a program where I was trying to squat every day. And so, the end result was that my knee had no time to recover ever, just none whatsoever. And things got worse and worse and worse and worse to the point where, it was hurting, like really hurting every single day. And I couldn't get around that, right? Like, when your job is to, go in and carry stuff, you can't have a day, where you're just like, I need to, take a week or two off to let my knee heal up. Like that just wasn't an option. And so ultimately what I ended up doing was quitting that job. And, the injury wasn't, the only reason for that. There were plenty of other reasons. But, it took, I would say, a solid year or year and a half after the time that I quit that job and sort of started pulling back on my training my legs a bit less seriously, or, training squats a bit less seriously. It took a really, really long time for that injury to heal up. And that was in large part because I was not smart about it and because I was just continuing to push things unsustainably. It still lasts a bit to this day as well. Like I still have that knee that I injured still feels a bit creaky and weird whenever I, go really heavy on squats. I've had to take it very cautiously on squats for the last few years in terms of my training, and I've had to be a lot more proactive about, just being careful, deloading, taking a week off here and there, taking breaks, not pushing it when things are starting to act up. I learned a lot better from that, how to listen to my body and how to know when I'm pushing things too hard and when I need to sort of step back and, just let my body recover a bit. Since then, I would say that was about 4 or 5 years ago. Since then, I've been pretty lucky and pretty blessed that I've been, basically relatively injury-free. I have been, smart enough, especially since, the fact that I'm coaching a lot more people now, since I'm training a lot more people now, since I've been doing fitness as a job for, almost a decade now. I've learned a lot from my own mistakes and from working with clients and from learning, just sort of how people react to programs and seeing that in a wider scale, a more macro scale. I've been pretty lucky that I've learned from those lessons, and I've reached a point where the last 4 or 5 years, I have not made any major mistakes. I've been doing pretty well. I would say the only things that have really held me back are just my own stubbornness or unwillingness to do things. Maybe when it comes to my diet, I just don't feel like, nailing things down as much as I want to, or maybe when it comes to my training, I'm just like, I just don't feel like training as much as, I really need to see, X result. So in the last few years, all of my problems have been, luckily, things that I know, are the, it's like, well, yeah, that's the problem. I know that, it's mostly just about willpower and about sort of, just changes in my life and in my environment more than anything else. And I have not made any serious, huge mistakes, simply because I didn't know what I was doing. So that's really it for this week. As always, don't hesitate to like this video to help out the YouTube algorithm. Comment on the video, let me know what you want to see in future videos, and I will talk to you all next week. Have a good one.